Welcome back to the Deconstruction Zone. My name is Justin. In this video, we're going to be covering 7 of the most problematic laws of the Old Testament. Now, according to tradition, there are over 600 laws in the Old Testament, so we're only going to be scratching the surface in this video. First law we're going to cover is Leviticus 25:43 through 46, and this is specifically referring to non-Hebrew slaves. Almost all of the passages on slavery in the Old Testament are referring to Hebrew debt bondage. However, there is one interlude in Leviticus 25 that speaks specifically of foreign slaves, and it says, "You shall not rule over him," your Hebrew slaves, "with severity, but you are to revere your God." Now about the foreign slaves. "As for your male and female slaves, whom you may have, you may acquire male and female slaves from the pagan nations that are around you. You may also acquire from them the sons of the foreign residents who reside among you, and from their families who are with you, whom they will have produced in your land. They also may become your possession. You may also pass them on as an inheritance to your sons after you, to receive as a possession. You can use them as permanent slaves. But in respect to your own countrymen, the sons of Israel, you shall not rule with severity over one another." So there's a clear delineation between Hebrew and non-Hebrew slaves, in which the Hebrew slaves are expected to have some level of dignity, whereas the foreign slaves, by contrast, are allowed to be ruled over with severity. Moreover, unlike Hebrew slaves, which go free in the 7th year, non-Hebrew slaves were slaves for life, as were their children and their children's children. They were your property for all ages to come. Now, there is an apologetic for this, which is basically that, well, allowing them to live as slaves is more humane than just killing them. And I would say it doesn't matter if they're Canaanites or if they're foreigners outside of Canaan. Human slavery is never okay, and the fact that God permits human slavery for non-Hebrew people is abhorrent, no matter what the context of the passage is. There is no hermeneutic or context that makes owning another human being okay, much less their children, much less being able to treat them with severity. Now, our next concerning law comes from Exodus 21 and is also partnered with Deuteronomy 21. It states in Exodus 21:17, "And one who curses his father or mother shall certainly be put to death." And if that wasn't bad enough, there are actually rules on how to and when to put your stubborn son to death, and that is in Deuteronomy 21:18 through 21. "If any person has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father or his mother, and when they discipline him, he does not listen to them, then his father or mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of the city, 'This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He does not obey us. He is thoughtless and given to drinking.' Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death. So you shall eliminate the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear about it and fear it." This is problematic on many levels, but I would suggest the most problematic is the fact that this law seems to be about protecting the shame of the father and not about actual justice. Now, many will point out that in Exodus 21:17, there appears to actually be a crime. It says, "Anyone who curses his father or mother shall certainly be put to death." And this is, in fact, more severe than just being disobedient or even being a drunkard. However, in the ancient world, they believed in curses, and in the modern world, we do not. And that is why this particular passage is extra ridiculous in my view, because we don't accept that you can literally just curse something or curse somebody and then something bad would happen. These are akin to magic in the modern world, and if we don't accept them today, we shouldn't accept it in our Bible. Now, laws 3 and 4 are somewhat related. They're both dealing with virginity. In Deuteronomy 21:10 through 14, we read about captive virgins that are taken in war. "When you go out to battle against your enemies, and the Lord your God hands them over to you, and you take them away captive," meaning carrying away literally in the Hebrew, "and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and are strongly attracted to her, and would take her as a wife for yourself, then you shall bring her into your home, and she shall shave her head and trim her nails. She shall also remove the clothes of her captivity, and shall remain in your house, and weep for her father and mother a full month. After that you may have relations with her, and become her husband, and she shall become your wife. But it shall be, if you are not pleased with her, then you shall let her go wherever she wants. You certainly shall not sell her for money, and you shall not treat her as merchandise. since you have humiliated her. Now, this allowance for the woman to go free as opposed to being sold is supposed to be an act of kindness, but all this is really saying is that if you take a captive bride, a kidnapped woman who is non-consensually becoming your bride, if you do take her to be your bride and then you defile her because you slept with her, you cannot just get rid of her like you would with a slave. You have to treat her like a wife, which means you actually have to give her a writ of divorce and let her go free wherever she wants. It doesn't say here that you have to give her a writ of divorce, but it most likely would have been implied, because if she was your wife, you would have needed a contract and you would have needed to break that contract or at least nullify that contract when you let her go. Our next one comes from Numbers 31:14 through 18, and this is still referring to captive virgins. But Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds, who had come from service in the war. And Moses said to them, "Have you spared all the women? Behold, they caused the sons of Israel, through the counsel of Balaam, to be unfaithful to the Lord in the matter of Peor, so that the plague took place among the congregation of the Lord. Now therefore, kill every male among the children and every woman who is known man intimately. However, all the girls, all the young women who have not known a man intimately, keep alive for yourselves." This is a really interesting passage because this is referring to an incident where the Israelites went to war with one of the Canaanite cities, and they were supposed to take all of the city and completely destroy it along with the inhabitants. There were supposed to be no survivors. There should be no captive women, but the men kept some of the women and children captive. What an act of mercy. So what did Moses command them to do after inquiring of the Lord? He commanded them to kill all of the children and all of the women who are not virgins and only keep the virgins, because women in the Old Testament were viewed akin to property, and their value was based on their virginity and their ability to reproduce. A couple questions to ask yourself about this particular passage. 1, why are only the virgin women allowed to survive? Why are not the non-virgin women allowed to survive? Even if we're assuming that they're unmarried, why can they not survive and then remarry? Number 2, why do the children need to be killed? Are we to believe that the God of the universe, the one that spoke all things into existence, could not conceive of a method or a plan to take care of the innocent bystanders of war? That the young boys and the children had to be murdered and then the women had to be forced into non-consensual marriages? Is this really what we would come to expect of a God that is both all-loving and all-powerful? Moreover, if God is not capable of taking care of the innocent widows and orphans of war, then maybe he doesn't have any business causing that war to begin with. In fact, all of the people that he wished to kill in the promised land so he can give it to the Israelites, he could have just killed himself with the snap of his fingers, but instead he sent people into war, and many innocent, even Israelites, died in those wars, not to mention all of the innocent women and children that were non-Israelites. Now, law number 4 comes from Deuteronomy 22:13 through 21, and this is in reference to a woman who is found or potentially found to not be a virgin on her wedding day. If any man takes a wife and goes into her and then turns against her, and he charges her with shameful behavior and publicly defames her and says, "I took this woman, but when I came near to her, I did not find her to have evidence of virginity," then the girl's father and mother shall take and bring out the evidence of the girl's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. And the girl's father shall say to the elders, "I gave my daughter to this man as a wife, but he turned against her. And behold, he has charged her with shameful behavior, saying, I did not find your daughter to have evidence of virginity, but this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread out the garment before the elders of the city. Then the elders of that city shall take the man and rebuke him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give it to the girl's father, because he publicly defamed a virgin in Israel. And she shall remain his wife. He is not allowed to divorce her all of his days. But if this charge is true, and they did not find the girl to have evidence of virginity, then they shall bring the girl out to the doorway of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her to death, because she has committed a disgraceful sin in Israel by playing the prostitute in her father's house. so you shall eliminate the evil from among you. The problems with this passage don't really need to be explained. Any observer in the modern world knows that there are both scientific issues here, but also an inconsistent level of justice being administered. For example, the woman, if she is found lying, is put to death. The man, if he accuses her in vain, only has to pay a fine, and that fine doesn't even go to the woman, it goes to the woman's father because he has placed shame upon her father's household. Nothing is actually given to the woman who is accused falsely. That being said, the evidence of her virginity is really curious because in the ancient world, and this is still practiced in some cultures even today, was basically a sheet or a blanket or some type of bedding that you had on your wedding night. It was typically in the parents' house of the bride. So you actually consummated your marriage in the house where the father and mother were present. And then the blood spotting or any type of blood that came from the sexual intercourse would be on that particular garment. You can save that garment then as evidence of the woman's virginity. Now, anyone who knows anything about biology or physiology knows that not every woman actually bleeds when she has sex for the first time, and not every woman even has an intact hymen when she has sex for the first time. It is not uncommon for a young girl to accidentally tear the hymen doing some sort of activity, whether it's strenuous lifting or in modern days riding on an animal like a horse. There are many ways in which you can get to your wedding night and there is no actual bleeding apparent. And so the idea that not only should we be killing women who potentially lie about being a virgin on their wedding night, but also that this command comes from God, and God is not able to differentiate between someone who is legitimately not a virgin or someone who just had some other biological or physiological explanation for not bleeding. It is clear that in the ancient world, their conception of reality is quite limited. And we obviously wouldn't accept this today as proof of somebody's virginity because we know better. So why do we give the Bible a pass? We shouldn't. And so what would happen to the woman that was innocently accused? She, of course, would be blessed with having to stay with her husband forever, having no option to divorce him. Our fifth law comes from Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, and is usually referred to as a Levirate marriage. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside of the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall have relations with her and take her to himself as a wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall then be that the firstborn to whom she gives birth shall assume the name of the father's deceased brother, so that his name will not be wiped out from Israel. In this passage, it seems quite clear that the woman doesn't actually have any consent over who she marries, and in fact, this particular law only exists so that the name of her husband will not be blotted out. But we are left to conclude here that a woman's role is as a reproductive partner and nothing more. At no point in time will she be granted the rights of a man. Now, our sixth law is usually referred to as the ritual of the bitter water, and this comes from the ritual itself that we see in Numbers 5, 11 through 31. I'm not going to read the entire passage, but I'm going to read enough of it to make sense of it. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, if any man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him, and a man has sexual relations with her, and it is hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she remains undiscovered, although she has defiled herself, and there is no witness against her, and she has not been caught in the act. If an attitude of jealousy comes over him, and he is jealous of his wife when she has defiled herself, or if an attitude of jealousy comes over him, and he is jealous of his wife when she has not defiled herself, the man shall bring his wife to the priest. Then the woman is going to be made to drink a potion that is from the dirt of the ground, as well as scrapings from a scroll that contained a curse." It says in 23, "The priest shall then write these curses on a scroll, and he shall wash them off into the water of bitterness. Then he shall make the woman drink the water of bitterness that brings a curse, so that the water which brings a curse will go into her and cause bitterness. When he has made her drink the water, then it comes about, if she has defiled herself and has been unfaithful to her husband, that the water which brings a curse will go into her and cause bitterness, and her belly will swell up, and her thigh will fall away, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, she will be immune and conceive children. What's happening here is a trial by bitter water. Basically, they make a toxic potion and a curse, and then they make the woman drink it. If she was indeed unfaithful, it's going to cause a miscarriage. If she is not unfaithful, then she will have the child. And now this passage has been hotly debated about how to translate it properly. However, a literal translation from the Hebrew into English literally says, her thigh will fall away, the thigh being an idiom for the female reproductive organ. We see this both for male and female reproductive organs in the Old Testament and other ancient Hebrew texts. The thigh is basically a clean reference to a dirty body part. And now, in support of the view that this is a miscarriage being induced, we have the word nogelet being used for falling away, referring to the female reproductive organ that's going to be cursed. That organ is going to be falling away, referring to what would happen in the event of a miscarriage. The stomach will swell and whatever is in there will be falling away. So not only is this ritual ridiculous, believing that you can make a cursed potion, give it to a human being, then that human being would either conceive or miscarriage based on whether or not they were telling the truth is absurd. And that leads us to our seventh rule, which is that bastard children are not allowed to enter the congregation of the Lord. We read in Deuteronomy 23:2, no one of illegitimate birth may enter the assembly of the Lord. None of his descendants, even to the 10th generation, may enter the assembly of the Lord. And so what crime did these children commit that they are no longer able to commune with the Israelites and with the Lord? Well, no crime, of course. It has nothing to do with whether or not they're guilty. It has to do with whether or not they are impure. God places much more value on a person being clean or free from impurity than he does whether or not that person has intrinsic value. And of course, that's why we see that even someone who's committed no crime is not allowed in the congregation of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. And if God's aversion to impurity wasn't convincing enough, let's read also in Deuteronomy 23, this time 12 through 14. You shall also have a place allocated outside the camp, so that you may go out there to relieve yourselves. And you shall have a spade among your tools, and it shall be when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it, and shall turn and cover up your excrement. Since the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to save you and to defeat your enemies before you, your camp must be holy. So he must not see anything indecent among you, or he will turn away from you. There's another rule actually pertaining to this about dead bodies inside of the camp, because again, if the Lord is dwelling among the camp of the Israelites, it's imperative that he does not come in contact with anything that is unclean. To be clear, in the Old Testament, the division between God and man is not sin, it is impurity. It just happens that they believed some impurities were caused by moral failings, which we call sin. However, even if somebody was morally pure, you could be ritually impure, and that, according to God, results in the same exact effect, because your moral purity was not nearly as important as whether or not God had a clean and pure place to dwell in. Of course, this mirrors what we see in the ancient Mesopotamian texts. The ancient ziggurats had the same exact function as the temple in the Old Testament. Gods would descend from the sky and they would dwell in the upper room of the ziggurat. And of course, there were extensive rituals, both for cleaning and purifying the upper room of the ziggurat, as well as for purifying the people who would come to worship at the base of the ziggurat. And so the separation between God and man, both in the Old Testament as well as the Mesopotamian text, is always about whether or not you have created a pure and unsullied space for the deity to come and be fed and get rested and worshiped. Now, that is only 7 laws from the Old Testament. As I mentioned previously, there are over 600 laws listed in the Torah. So if you have any laws that you think should be included in the list of ridiculous laws, please leave them in the comments. I'll be most interested to hear your opinion.